In the shadows of ancient castle walls, where power whispers through velvet corridors and loyalty hangs by threads of gold, a secret recording would shatter everything the kingdom believed about their beloved rulers. What started as routine security protocols would uncover a web of deception so intricate that even the most trusted guardians would question everything they swore to protect. When duty collides with conscience, and truth becomes more dangerous than lies, one man's choice to speak would either save a crown or destroy it forever. The morning mist clung to Raven's Hollow Castle like a shroud, and Captain Marcus Blackwood felt the weight of 20 years' service pressing against his shoulders as he walked the familiar stone corridors. At 45, he had dedicated half his life to protecting the royal family of Aldermere, first serving the late King Edmund, and now his son, King Alexander III. The castle had been his world, its secrets his burden, and its inhabitants his sacred trust. Marcus paused at the tall windows overlooking the East Gardens, where Queen Consort Vivian often took her morning walks. She moved gracefully among the rose bushes, her auburn hair catching the filtered sunlight. But there was something different about her today. Her usual serene demeanor seemed forced, her smile too practiced, her gestures too calculated. As head of the Royal Protection Service, Marcus had learned to read people like ancient manuscripts, and what he saw in the Queen Consort troubled him deeply. The Kingdom of Aldermere had celebrated when King Alexander married Vivian Ashford 3 years ago. She was everything a modern queen should be: intelligent, charitable, and beautiful. The people adored her, and the media painted her as a refreshing change from the stuffy traditions of the old monarchy. But Marcus had always maintained a professional distance, watching and protecting without judgment. That distance had served him well until recently. It began with small things. Conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Meetings that weren't on the official schedule. Phone calls taken in private chambers with doors locked and curtains drawn. As someone responsible for the royal family's security, Marcus was naturally observant, but these patterns felt different. They felt dangerous. The turning point came during a state dinner 3 weeks ago. Marcus had been conducting his routine security sweep when he discovered a small recording device hidden in the king's private study. It wasn't placed by his team, nor by any of the authorized security personnel. The device was sophisticated, nearly impossible to detect without the right equipment. Someone with considerable resources and inside knowledge had planted it there. Marcus had faced a terrible decision that night. Protocol demanded he report the device immediately to his superiors and launch a full investigation. But something held him back, a nagging suspicion that the threat might be coming from within the very institution he was sworn to protect. Instead of removing the device, he had done something that violated every rule of his profession. He left it in place and began his own investigation. What followed were 3 weeks of careful observation, discreet inquiries, and growing unease. Marcus discovered that Queen Vivian had been holding private meetings with Dr. Helena Morse, a physician who had recently joined the royal medical staff. These meetings always occurred when King Alexander was away on official duties, and they were never recorded in any official capacity. Dr. Morse's background appeared impeccable at first glance. She had trained at the finest medical institutions, held positions at prestigious hospitals, and came with glowing recommendations. But Marcus had contacts throughout the security community, and a few careful inquiries revealed troubling gaps in her history. There were periods where her whereabouts were unaccounted for, and her financial records showed payments from sources that couldn't be easily traced. The king's health had been declining subtly over the past months. Nothing dramatic or immediately alarming, but a pattern of fatigue, occasional confusion, and what the royal physicians attributed to stress from his demanding schedule. King Alexander was only 52, in previously excellent health, and had always maintained an active lifestyle. The gradual deterioration seemed inconsistent with his medical history. Marcus began to piece together a terrifying possibility. If someone wanted to harm the king, The most effective method wouldn't be a dramatic assassination that would trigger immediate investigation. Instead, it would be a slow, methodical approach that appeared natural, perhaps accelerating existing health issues or introducing new ones that could be attributed to the pressures of royal life. The recorded conversations he had been monitoring through the hidden device painted an increasingly disturbing picture. While he never heard explicit plans for violence, there were coded discussions about timing, opportunities, and necessary changes for the kingdom's future. Queen Vivian's voice carried a cold calculation that bore no resemblance to her public persona. One evening, while reviewing the audio recordings in his private office, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. Queen Vivian was speaking to someone on the phone, her voice barely above a whisper, but the recording equipment was sensitive enough to capture every word. "The physician says we're making progress," she said. "Alexander's condition should deteriorate more rapidly now. The new medication will ensure that. Dr. Morse has been very cooperative, especially considering what we know about her past indiscretions." There was a pause, presumably while the other party responded, and then Vivian continued. "The succession is already established. With Alexander gone, and no direct heirs, the crown will pass to his cousin, Duke Edmund, and Edmund has always been manageable. Our position will be secure." Marcus had sat in stunned silence, replaying the recording multiple times to ensure he hadn't misunderstood. The implications were staggering. The queen consort was not only planning her husband's death, but had already arranged for a compliant successor. This wasn't just murder, it was a coup disguised as natural succession. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. As a career military man turned royal protector, he had sworn multiple oaths of loyalty to the crown, to the king personally, and to the institution of the monarchy. But he had also sworn to protect the royal family from all threats, even those that came from within. Sleep became elusive as Marcus grappled with his options. He could take the evidence to the Metropolitan Police, but royal security matters were handled through special channels, and he wasn't certain who could be trusted. The conspiracy seemed to extend beyond just Queen Vivian and Dr. Morse. References in the recorded conversations suggested other participants, possibly including members of the court or even other security personnel. Going to the king directly presented its own risks. Alexander was clearly being poisoned, which meant his judgment might be compromised. Moreover, accusing his wife of attempted murder would require irrefutable evidence. If Marcus was wrong, or if the accusation couldn't be proven, it would mean the end of his career and possibly criminal charges for violating privacy laws and conducting unauthorized surveillance. But doing nothing meant watching King Alexander die slowly while his wife positioned herself and her allies to control the throne. Marcus had served the crown faithfully for 2 decades, and he couldn't stand by while everything he had sworn to protect was destroyed from within. As autumn rain began to pelt against his office windows, Marcus made his decision. He would gather more evidence, document everything meticulously, and then find a way to expose the plot without destroying the monarchy itself. The challenge would be timing and discretion. Moving too quickly could alert the conspirators, but waiting too long could cost the king his life. Little did Marcus know that his own activities had not gone unnoticed. Queen Vivian had her own network of informants within the castle, and reports of the captain's unusual behavior had begun to reach her ears. The game of cat and mouse was about to become far more dangerous for everyone involved. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would change everything. Dr. Morse had been found dead in her London apartment, apparently the victim of a burglary gone wrong. The official reports indicated that nothing had been stolen, but the physician had suffered fatal injuries during what police assumed was a struggle with an intruder. Marcus knew better. Dr. Morse had become a liability, someone who could expose the entire conspiracy if she was caught, or if her conscience finally overcame her greed. Her death was meant to look random, but it was clearly an elimination of a loose end. The question was whether Marcus himself was now considered a similar threat. The shadows in Raven's Hollow Castle had grown longer and darker, and Captain Marcus Blackwood realized that his next move would determine not only his own survival, but the very future of the kingdom he had devoted his life to protecting. The news of Dr. Helena Morse's death reached Raven's Hollow Castle on a gray Thursday morning, delivered through official channels as a routine security briefing. Marcus sat in the morning security meeting, listening to the dry recitation of facts while his mind raced through the implications. Around the conference table, other senior protection officers discussed the need to review the Royal Medical Staff's security protocols, completely unaware of the true significance of the physician's demise. Queen Vivian's reaction to the news was a masterpiece of calculated performance. She expressed appropriate shock and concern, mentioning how Dr. Morse had recently provided excellent care during a minor health scare. Her words were perfectly measured, her emotional responses precisely calibrated to appear genuine without being excessive. But Marcus caught the brief flash of satisfaction in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. King Alexander, however, appeared genuinely distressed by the news. He had grown fond of Dr. Morse, appreciating her modern approach to medicine and her ability to explain complex medical concepts in accessible terms. The king's reaction only reinforced Marcus's belief that Alexander was completely unaware of the conspiracy unfolding around him. Over the following days, Marcus noticed subtle changes in the castle's atmosphere. Security protocols were adjusted under the guise of responding to Dr. Morse's death, but the modifications seemed designed to limit access to certain areas and create new blind spots in the surveillance network. Staff assignments were shuffled, placing new faces in critical positions while veteran employees were transferred to less sensitive roles. Marcus realized he was running out of time. With Dr. Morse dead, Queen Vivian would need to find alternative means to continue her plan, or she might accelerate the timeline to avoid further exposure. Either scenario presented immediate danger to King Alexander. The hidden recording device in the king's study continued to provide valuable intelligence. 3 days after Dr. Morse's death, it captured a conversation that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Queen Vivian was speaking to someone she addressed only as Edmund, presumably Duke Edmund, who would inherit the throne if King Alexander died without an heir. Helena's death has complicated things, Vivian said, her voice tight with frustration. We need to move to the contingency plan sooner than anticipated. Duke Edmund's voice was nervous, uncertain. Are you sure this is necessary, Vivian? Alexander seems to trust you completely. Perhaps we could find a way to influence his decisions without taking such drastic steps. Edmund, you've always been too soft for this kind of work, Vivian replied sharply. Alexander may trust me, but he's stubborn about the direction of a monarchy. He wants to modernize too quickly, reduce the influence of traditional families like yours, and limit the financial benefits that come with our positions. If we allow him to continue, we'll all be relegated to ceremonial roles with no real power or wealth. There was a long pause before Edmund spoke again. What about the medication approach? Could we find another physician to cooperate? Too risky now, Vivian said. Helena's death has focused attention on the medical staff. We need something that appears more natural, an accident or sudden illness that won't trigger extensive investigation. Marcus felt his hands tremble as he transcribed the conversation. They were discussing multiple methods of murder, treating the king's life as nothing more than an obstacle to their ambitions. The casual nature of their planning was almost as shocking as the content itself. The next piece of their conversation revealed the timeline Marcus had been dreading. The state visit to Scotland next week presents opportunities, Vivian continued. The Highlands location is remote, the weather could be unpredictable, and there are numerous activities where accidents could occur naturally. Mountain hiking, hunting, even simple vehicle travel on those narrow roads. You're talking about making it happen during an official state visit? Edmund's voice rose with alarm. The security will be overwhelming. How could we possibly? Leave the security arrangements to me, Vivian interrupted. I have more influence over the protection details than you might expect. Certain personnel have proven quite cooperative when properly motivated. Marcus's blood ran cold. The implication was clear. Queen Vivian had corrupted members of the Royal Protection Service. His own colleagues, people he trusted with his life and the lives of the royal family, might be working against everything they had sworn to protect. This revelation forced Marcus to reconsider every aspect of his investigation. If other protection officers were compromised, his activities might have been under surveillance from the beginning. His unauthorized recording, his discreet inquiries, his unusual behavior, all of it could have been reported back to the conspiracy. The Scotland trip was scheduled to begin in 5 days. King Alexander was looking forward to it, particularly the outdoor activities that would allow him to escape the formal constraints of palace life. The visit was meant to strengthen ties with Scottish cultural organizations and promote tourism in the Highlands. Instead, it was being planned as the location of his murder. Marcus spent the next 2 days conducting his own investigation into the loyalty of his fellow protection officers. Using his security clearance and access to personnel files, he began looking for irregularities in financial records, unusual behavior patterns, or any other signs of compromise. The process was delicate. Too much scrutiny might alert the very people he was investigating. His worst fears were confirmed when he discovered that Lieutenant James Crawford, one of the junior protection officers, had received several large cash deposits into his personal account over the past 3 months. Crawford was scheduled to be part of the advanced security team for the Scotland visit, responsible for route planning and venue preparation. Further investigation revealed that Sergeant Patricia Wells, a communications specialist, had been making encrypted phone calls outside normal protocols. Her access to secure communication channels would make her invaluable for coordinating activities that needed to remain hidden from standard security oversight. Marcus realized he was facing a conspiracy that extended throughout multiple levels of the protection service. The very institution he had devoted his career to building was being used as a weapon against the person it was meant to protect. With the Scotland trip approaching rapidly, Marcus knew he had to act. But his options remained limited and dangerous. Going through official channels would likely alert the conspirators and give them time to adjust their plans. Taking his evidence to external law enforcement would require explaining his unauthorized surveillance activities and could result in the evidence being dismissed as illegally obtained. The solution came to him during a sleepless night spent reviewing the audio recordings. He needed to create a situation where the conspirators would reveal themselves more completely, providing irrefutable evidence of their intentions. It would be dangerous, requiring him to put himself and potentially the king at greater risk, but it might be the only way to expose the full scope of the conspiracy. Marcus decided to approach Queen Vivian directly, but not with accusations. Instead, he would present himself as a potential ally, someone whose cooperation could be bought or coerced. If he could get her to reveal more details about the Scotland plan, he might be able to gather enough evidence to stop it. The approach would require careful preparation. Marcus spent hours crafting a believable story about his own financial difficulties and growing disillusionment with his role in the protection service. He would need to convince Vivian that he was available for recruitment while secretly recording their conversation. On the Monday before the Scotland departure, Marcus requested a private meeting with Queen Vivian, ostensibly to discuss security arrangements for the trip. She agreed to see him in her private sitting room, a location that would provide privacy for the conversation he was planning. As he prepared for what might be the most important conversation of his career, Marcus reflected on the irony of his situation. He had spent 20 years learning to protect people from external threats, never imagining that the greatest danger would come from within the very family he served. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. Whether it would save King Alexander's life or seal Marcus's own fate remained to be seen. But Captain Marcus Blackwood had made his choice. He would risk everything to expose the truth, no matter the personal consequences. Tuesday afternoon arrived with unseasonable warmth for October, the kind of deceptively pleasant weather that often preceded storms. Marcus made his way through the castle's ornate corridors toward Queen Vivian's private sitting room, each step feeling heavier than the last. Hidden in his jacket was a tiny recording device, state-of-the-art equipment that he had requisitioned under the pretense of testing new surveillance technology. The sitting room was elegantly appointed with antique furniture and oil paintings depicting pastoral scenes. Queen Vivian sat behind an ornate writing desk, her posture perfect, her smile welcoming but somehow predatory. She was dressed in a navy blue dress that complemented her auburn hair, every detail of her appearance calculated to project authority and grace. "Captain Blackwood," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Thank you for taking the time to discuss the Scotland arrangements personally. I know how busy you must be with the preparations." Marcus settled into the chair, forcing his expression to remain neutral despite the knowledge of what this woman was planning. "Of course, Your Majesty. The security of the royal family is my primary concern, and I wanted to ensure that we address any special considerations for the Highland visit." "How thoughtful of you," Vivian replied, her fingers absently tracing the edge of a letter opener on her desk. "I must say, I've been impressed by your dedication over the years. 20 years of faithful service is quite remarkable in today's world." The conversation began innocuously enough, with discussions of weather contingencies and local security resources in Scotland. But Marcus had learned to read the subtle signals of human behavior, and he could sense Vivian probing, testing his responses, evaluating his potential usefulness. "I've been thinking lately about the challenges facing people in your position," she said eventually, her tone becoming more personal. "The Royal Protection Service demands complete loyalty and discretion, but the financial compensation hardly reflects the importance of your work. I imagine it must be difficult to plan for retirement on a government salary." Marcus saw his opening. "It's been a concern, Your Majesty. The pension will be adequate, but hardly generous. And with the rising costs of everything." He let his voice trail off, hoping to project the financial stress he was pretending to feel. Vivian leaned forward slightly, her eyes studying his face with new intensity. "It's unfortunate that the most valuable people are often the least valued financially. Someone with your experience and access could be quite valuable in the private sector, I would imagine." "Perhaps," Marcus replied carefully, "though I've always believed that loyalty to the crown comes before personal gain." "Of course," Vivian said quickly, "your loyalty is unquestioned. But loyalty should be reciprocal, don't you think? The crown should take care of those who serve it so faithfully." The conversation was moving in exactly the direction Marcus had hoped, but he knew he needed to be patient to let Vivian believe she was recruiting him rather than pushing too hard too quickly. "I've sometimes wondered," she continued, "whether those closest to the royal family truly understand the complexities of modern monarchy. The challenges of balancing tradition with progress, the delicate relationships that must be maintained to preserve the institution." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "King Alexander certainly faces difficult decisions. His vision for modernizing the monarchy is admirable, though perhaps idealistic." Vivian's eyes sharpened at his comment. "You have concerns about the king's direction?" "Not concerns, exactly," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "But 20 years in security teaches you to think practically. Some changes happen whether we plan for them or not." "How perceptive of you," Vivian said, and Marcus caught the satisfied smile that flickered across her face. "Change is indeed inevitable. The question is whether we guide it or are swept away by it." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where she had been walking that morning when Marcus first began to suspect her true nature. "The Scotland visit presents interesting challenges," she said, her voice taking on a more businesslike tone. "The Highlands can be treacherous, especially for someone not familiar with the terrain." "I've been reviewing the security protocols extensively," Marcus replied. "The hiking excursions in particular require careful planning." "Yes, the hiking," Vivian said, turning back to face him. "King Alexander is so enthusiastic about those outdoor activities. Sometimes I worry about his safety, especially given his recent health concerns." This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. "Health concerns, Your Majesty?" "Nothing serious, or so the doctors tell me," she said with what appeared to be genuine worry. "But He's been experiencing fatigue, occasional dizziness. I've noticed it becoming more pronounced lately. I'm concerned that strenuous activities might exacerbate whatever he's dealing with. Marcus felt a chill as he realized she was setting up the narrative for her husband's death, creating a medical foundation that would make an accident seem plausible. Has he seen a specialist about these symptoms? Dr. Morse was monitoring the situation, Vivian said, her voice taking on a note of calculated sadness. Her tragic death has been such a loss. She really understood Alexander's condition. Perhaps another physician could review her notes? Marcus suggested, playing his role. Unfortunately, there was a burglary at her office as well as her home, Vivian said. Most of her patient files were destroyed. We'll need to start fresh with a new physician after the Scotland visit. The implication was clear. There would be no need for a new physician because King Alexander wouldn't be alive to require one. Marcus struggled to maintain his composure as the casual nature of her planning struck him again. Captain Blackwood, Vivian said, returning to her seat and fixing him with a direct gaze, I've been thinking about making some changes to the protection service after we return from Scotland. People like you, with experience and discretion, will be valuable as we navigate the transition period. Transition period, Your Majesty? The monarchy is entering a new phase, she said carefully. There may be adjustments to roles, responsibilities, perhaps even the line of succession. Those who demonstrate understanding and flexibility during this period will find their loyalty rewarded. Marcus knew she was offering him a choice, cooperation or elimination. I've always served at the pleasure of the crown, he said. Whatever changes come, I'm prepared to adapt. I'm pleased to hear that, Vivian said, and her smile was genuinely warm for the first time during their conversation. There may be specific ways you can assist during the Scotland visit. Small adjustments to security protocols, perhaps timing modifications that could prove beneficial. She was asking him to help create opportunities for the assassination. Marcus felt sick, but he forced himself to nod thoughtfully. I'm certainly willing to discuss any modifications that would serve the crown's interests. Excellent, Vivian said, rising from her chair. Lieutenant Crawford will contact you this evening with some specific suggestions. I trust you'll find them reasonable. As Marcus prepared to leave, Vivian added one final comment that sent chills down his spine. It's refreshing to work with someone who understands that sometimes protecting the crown requires difficult decisions. Not everyone has the stomach for what's truly necessary. Marcus left the sitting room with his recording device full of incriminating evidence, but also with the knowledge that he was now expected to actively participate in King Alexander's murder. Crawford's contact that evening would likely include specific details about how the assassination would be carried out, making Marcus an accessory to conspiracy. But he also realized that Vivian's confidence in recruiting him presented an opportunity. If he could learn the exact details of the plot, he might be able to prevent it while gathering enough evidence to expose the entire conspiracy. That evening, Lieutenant Crawford called Marcus's private line at exactly 9 o'clock. The conversation was brief and coded, but the implications were clear. During the hiking excursion scheduled for Thursday, there would be an equipment failure resulting in a fatal fall. Crawford's advance team had already identified the location and prepared the necessary modifications to safety equipment. Marcus spent that night staring at the ceiling, knowing that he now had less than 48 hours to prevent a murder and expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the monarchy. The weight of King Alexander's life and the future of the institution Marcus had served faithfully for 2 decades rested entirely on his next moves. The game had entered its final phase, and Captain Marcus Blackwood was the only person standing between a king and his executioners. Wednesday morning brought with it the controlled chaos that always preceded a royal visit. Staff members hurried through the castle corridors with last-minute preparations, while security teams conducted final equipment checks and reviewed protocols. To the casual observer, everything appeared routine, but Marcus moved through it all with the knowledge that he was watching the preparation for an assassination. Lieutenant Crawford approached him during the morning briefing, his demeanor professional but his eyes holding a new, calculating quality that Marcus had never noticed before. "Captain, I've completed the advanced reconnaissance for the hiking routes," Crawford said, handing over a detailed map. "I've identified some areas where additional safety measures might be advisable." Marcus studied the map, noting the red marks Crawford had made at various points along the planned hiking trail. One location in particular drew his attention, a narrow ridge path called Devil's Backbone, where the trail curved along a steep cliff face overlooking a rocky gorge hundreds of feet below. Crawford had marked this section with multiple notations about equipment requirements and safety protocols. "This section looks particularly challenging," Marcus said, pointing to Devil's Backbone. "Yes, sir," Crawford replied, his voice steady but his hands showing the slightest tremor. "The rock face is unstable in several places, and the safety line anchors will need special attention. I've arranged for the equipment to be pre-positioned this afternoon." Marcus understood immediately. Crawford's special attention to the safety line anchors meant sabotage. King Alexander's life would depend on climbing equipment that had been deliberately weakened to fail at a critical moment. The assassination would appear to be a tragic accident, the result of equipment failure on a dangerous mountain trail. After the briefing, Marcus retreated to his office and immediately began transcribing his recorded conversation with Queen Vivian from the previous day. Every word needed to be documented precisely, creating an irrefutable record of her admission of the conspiracy. But even as he worked, Marcus knew that audio recordings alone might not be sufficient evidence, especially given that they had been obtained through unauthorized surveillance. The solution came to him as he reviewed the timeline of events. If he could document the sabotage of the climbing equipment, photographing the modifications before they were discovered, it would provide physical evidence to support the audio recordings. The combination of Vivian's recorded admissions and proof of the sabotaged equipment would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. But accessing the equipment meant traveling to Scotland ahead of the royal party, something that would require careful explanation to avoid suspicion. Marcus decided to invoke his authority as head of security, claiming he needed to conduct a personal inspection of the advanced preparations. It was unusual, but not unprecedented for him to make such trips. By noon, Marcus was on a military helicopter bound for the Scottish Highlands, carrying with him a hidden camera and the weight of knowing that he had perhaps 18 hours to prevent a murder and expose a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of the monarchy. The helicopter landed at a small airfield near Glencoran, where the royal party was scheduled to stay at a restored castle that had been converted into a luxury lodge. The location was breathtaking, surrounded by mountains and forests that displayed autumn colors in brilliant reds and golds. Under any other circumstances, Marcus would have appreciated the natural beauty, but now every ridge and cliff face looked like a potential murder weapon. Crawford's advance team had been working at the site for 3 days, ostensibly preparing for the royal visit, but actually setting up the conditions for assassination. Marcus found them at the staging area where climbing equipment was being organized and checked. To the untrained eye, everything appeared professional and thorough. "Captain," Sergeant Patricia Wells approached him with apparent surprise. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow with the main party." "Last-minute security concerns," Marcus replied, maintaining his authoritative demeanor. "I wanted to personally review the arrangements for the hiking excursion." Wells nodded, but Marcus caught the quick glance she exchanged with Crawford. They were clearly communicating something, possibly wondering if Marcus's unexpected arrival was related to his supposed recruitment into the conspiracy. "Of course, sir," Crawford said, stepping forward. "Would you like me to walk you through the equipment preparations?" Marcus followed Crawford to a series of tables where climbing gear was laid out with military precision. Ropes, harnesses, carabiners, and anchoring equipment were arranged according to the planned route, each piece tagged for specific participants in the hiking party. Crawford lifted a bright red climbing harness, examining it with apparent care. "This is designated for King Alexander," he said. "I've personally inspected every component to ensure maximum safety." As Crawford demonstrated the harness's features, Marcus discreetly activated the hidden camera in his jacket, documenting the equipment from multiple angles. To the casual observer, the gear appeared perfect, but Marcus's trained eye caught subtle irregularities in the stitching of the harness straps and the alignment of the safety mechanisms. The anchoring points have been pre-installed along the route, Crawford continued, gesturing toward a collection of metal anchors and safety lines. Each one has been tested to exceed standard weight tolerances. Marcus followed Crawford to examine the anchoring equipment, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The metal anchors appeared solid and properly manufactured, but small scratches and file marks on several pieces suggested they had been deliberately weakened. The modifications were nearly invisible, detectable only by someone specifically looking for sabotage. As Marcus photographed the evidence, he realized the sophistication of the conspiracy. The assassination had been planned with military precision, using insider knowledge of security protocols and expert understanding of climbing equipment. This wasn't the work of amateurs or opportunists, but professionals with access to specialized knowledge and equipment. "Sir," Crawford's voice interrupted Marcus's documentation. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Marcus looked up to find both Crawford and Wells watching him with new suspicion. His intensive examination of the equipment had gone beyond what they would expect from a routine inspection. "Just being thorough," Marcus replied, forcing his voice to remain casual. 20 years in this job has taught me that details matter, especially when the king's safety is involved." "Of course, sir," Wells said, but her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by his explanation. Marcus spent the next hour conducting what appeared to be a comprehensive security review, documenting everything while maintaining the pretense of routine preparation. He photographed the sabotaged equipment from multiple angles, recorded GPS coordinates of the anchoring points, and created a detailed timeline of the planned hiking route. As afternoon faded into evening, Marcus realized he had gathered enough evidence to prove the conspiracy, but he still faced the challenge of preventing the assassination while exposing the full scope of the plot. Simply arresting Crawford and Wells would alert Queen Vivian and potentially allow other conspirators to escape justice. The solution required careful timing and coordination. Marcus needed to ensure King Alexander's safety while creating a situation where the conspirators would reveal themselves completely, providing irrefutable evidence of their intentions. That evening, Marcus made a series of encrypted communications to contacts he trusted completely, veterans of the Protection Service who had served with distinction and whose loyalty was beyond question. He shared portions of his evidence with them, creating a network of trusted allies who could act if something happened to him. As he prepared for the royal party's arrival the following morning, Marcus reflected on the magnitude of what he was attempting. He was essentially conducting a counter-conspiracy within the Royal Protection Service, using the same tactics and secrecy that the assassins were employing against them. The irony wasn't lost on him that in order to protect the institution he served, he was violating many of its rules and protocols. But sometimes loyalty required actions that went beyond official procedures, and Marcus had made his choice to prioritize truth and justice over bureaucratic compliance. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of weeks of investigation and preparation. King Alexander would arrive in Scotland expecting a pleasant outdoor excursion, unaware that his life hung in the balance, and that the people assigned to protect him were actually planning his murder. Marcus Blackwood would have one chance to save his king and expose a conspiracy that threatened the very heart of the monarchy. Whether he succeeded or failed, nothing would ever be the same again. Thursday morning dawned crisp and clear in the Scottish Highlands, with the kind of perfect weather that made outdoor activities irresistible. King Alexander arrived at Glen Corran with evident enthusiasm, delighted by the spectacular mountain scenery and eager to begin what he believed would be a refreshing break from the formal duties of royal life. Marcus watched from the security perimeter as the king greeted the advance team, his genuine warmth and appreciation for their efforts making the betrayal they were planning seem even more heinous. Queen Vivian accompanied her husband, playing her role of supportive consort perfectly while knowing she was watching a location where she expected him to die within hours. The hiking excursion was scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock, giving the security team time to conduct final equipment checks and route confirmations. Marcus used this period to position his trusted allies at strategic points, each carrying secure communications equipment that would allow them to coordinate their response when the moment came. At 9:30, Crawford began distributing the climbing equipment, making a show of double-checking each piece while actually ensuring that the sabotage gear reached its intended target. Marcus watched as the modified harness and anchoring equipment were assigned to King Alexander, feeling sick at the casual professionalism with which murder was being disguised as security preparation. "Your Majesty," Crawford said, approaching the king with the red harness. "If you could try this on, I'd like to ensure the fit is perfect for today's activities." King Alexander accepted the harness with good humor, joking about the complexities of modern safety equipment compared to the simpler approaches of previous generations. As he adjusted the straps, Marcus knew he was watching a man unknowingly putting on the instrument of his own death. The hiking party consisted of 8 people: King Alexander, Queen Vivian, 2 climbing guides, Crawford, Wells, Marcus, and one additional security officer whose loyalty Marcus was uncertain about. The route would take them along a scenic trail through Glen Corin, culminating in the traverse of Devil's Backbone, where the assassination was planned to occur. As they began the hike, Marcus activated the recording equipment hidden in his gear, documenting every moment of what he hoped would be the exposure of the conspiracy rather than its successful completion. The weight of King Alexander's life pressed on him as they climbed through the beautiful highland landscape. Queen Vivian maintained perfect composure throughout the early stages of the hike, chatting pleasantly with the guides and expressing appropriate concern for safety measures. But Marcus caught the subtle signals she exchanged with Crawford and Wells, communications that confirmed the timeline and positioning for the planned assassination. The group reached Devil's Backbone at noon, just as Crawford's planning had indicated. The narrow ridge path stretched ahead of them, with steep drops on both sides and spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. Under normal circumstances, it would be a challenging but manageable traverse for experienced hikers with proper safety equipment. "This is absolutely magnificent," King Alexander said, looking out over the gorge. "Thank you all for making this possible." Marcus felt his heart racing as Crawford began setting up the safety lines that were meant to fail. The lieutenant worked with apparent expertise, but Marcus knew he was actually positioning the weakened anchoring points and sabotaged equipment exactly where they would cause maximum damage when they failed. "Your Majesty," Crawford said, approaching the king with a modified safety line. "If you'll allow me to secure your harness to this anchor point, we can begin the traverse safely." This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. As Crawford reached for King Alexander's harness, Marcus stepped forward and spoke the words that would change everything. "I'm afraid I can't allow that, Lieutenant." The entire hiking party froze. Crawford's hand stopped inches from the king's equipment, and every eye turned toward Marcus with expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. "Captain," King Alexander said, clearly puzzled by the interruption. "Is there a problem with the safety procedures?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. "There's a problem with the equipment, and I have reason to believe your life is in immediate danger." Queen Vivian's composure cracked for just an instant, a flash of fury and panic crossing her face before she regained control. "Captain Blackwood, what are you talking about?" Marcus pulled out his camera and began displaying the images he had taken the previous day. "This climbing equipment has been sabotaged, Your Majesty. The anchoring points have been weakened, and the safety harness has been modified to fail under stress." Crawford's face had gone pale, and Wells was reaching for something inside her jacket. Marcus realized they might be armed and prepared to eliminate witnesses if their plan was exposed. Everyone remained calm. Marcus said, his military training taking over. "Your Majesty, please step away from Lieutenant Crawford and Sergeant Wells. The equipment they've prepared is designed to cause your death." King Alexander stared at Marcus in shock. Then looked at his wife and the security officers with growing understanding. "Vivian, is this true?" Queen Vivian's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation that Marcus had been documenting for weeks. "Alexander, you've always been too trusting. The kingdom needs leadership that understands the realities of power, not romantic idealism about democratic monarchy." The admission confirmed everything, but it also triggered immediate action from the conspirators. Wells drew a weapon from her jacket, but Marcus had anticipated this possibility and was already moving. Years of protection service had kept him in excellent physical condition, and his response was immediate and decisive. The struggle that followed was brief, but intense. Marcus disarmed Wells while shouting for King Alexander to take cover behind the rock formations. Crawford attempted to flee back down the trail, but was intercepted by the backup security officers Marcus had positioned throughout the area. Within minutes, both conspirators were secured, and Marcus was calling for emergency extraction and immediate investigation of the conspiracy. The evidence he had gathered over the previous weeks, combined with the attempted assassination and Queen Vivian's confession, provided overwhelming proof of the plot. King Alexander sat heavily on a rocky outcrop, staring at his wife with a mixture of heartbreak and disbelief. "How long, Vivian? How long have you been planning this?" "Long enough to realize that you are going to destroy everything we worked to build," she replied, her voice bitter. "Your precious reforms would have reduced us to powerless figureheads, living on government allowances while you gave away centuries of accumulated influence." The full scope of the conspiracy became clear during the intensive investigation that followed. Queen Vivian had been working with Duke Edmund and several other nobles to eliminate King Alexander and install a more malleable successor. Dr. Morse had been providing slow-acting poisons to gradually weaken the king's health, creating medical justification for the eventual assassination. The financial network supporting the conspiracy stretched across multiple countries, involving banking arrangements and investment funds designed to enrich the conspirators once they gained control of royal assets and influence. Crawford and Wells had been recruited through a combination of bribes and blackmail, their financial records revealing payments that traced back to accounts controlled by the conspiracy. Marcus's unauthorized surveillance, while technically illegal, was ruled admissible due to the extraordinary circumstances and the clear evidence of life-threatening conspiracy. The audio recordings of Queen Vivian's admissions, combined with the physical evidence of sabotaged equipment and financial documentation, created an irrefutable case. Queen Vivian, Duke Edmund, and 5 other conspirators were convicted of treason and conspiracy to commit murder. The scandal rocked the monarchy, but King Alexander's handling of the crisis actually strengthened public support for his leadership. His transparency about the investigation and his commitment to reforming security procedures demonstrated the kind of principled leadership that won respect from both traditionalists and modernizers. Marcus was awarded the highest civilian honor for his service, but he found little satisfaction in the recognition. The betrayal by colleagues he had trusted and the knowledge of how close the conspiracy had come to success left him questioning everything he thought he understood about loyalty and duty. 6 months later, as Marcus prepared for his retirement from the Royal Protection Service, King Alexander asked him to stay on as a special advisor for security reform. The king had learned that the greatest threats to the monarchy came not from external enemies, but from those closest to the crown who were willing to betray their oaths for personal gain. "The institution is only as strong as the people who serve it," Alexander said during their final meeting. "You've shown that true loyalty sometimes requires us to break the rules in service of higher principles. I need people like you to help rebuild what was broken." Marcus accepted the position, knowing that his work to protect the crown was far from over. The conspiracy had been exposed and defeated, but the underlying vulnerabilities that had made it possible still needed to be addressed. Building a protection service that could guard against both external threats and internal betrayal would be the work of years, not months. As he walked through the corridors of Raven's Hollow Castle for the first time since the Scotland incident, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. He had started as a simple soldier following orders, evolved into a protector sworn to serve the crown, and, finally, become someone willing to risk everything to expose the truth. The shadows in the castle seemed less threatening now, but Marcus knew they would never entirely disappear. Power would always attract those willing to abuse it, and the price of protecting democratic institutions was eternal vigilance. Captain Marcus Blackwood had learned that lesson in the most dramatic way possible, and he was determined to ensure that future generations would not have to learn it through similar crises. The crown's shadow would always exist, but now it was balanced by the light of truth and the commitment of those who understood that real loyalty meant protecting principles, not just people. In the end, that might be the most important lesson of all.